Welcome back to Driving and Dragons. It's Daniel, and we are here today to discuss something that has once again cropped up in the tabletop role-playing game universe over on the Twitters and the Facebooks of the world, and that is the mother of all safety tools, the RPG consent checklist. This thing comes up again, people come out and say the same stuff about it, gets argued about a little bit, and then it disappears into the ether, and then it comes up again on the merry-go-round. Just like any other safety tool, it refuses to die and go away, and it's either an absolute explicit need that must be done by everybody, and you're evil and bad and terrible if you don't do it, or it's the absolute worst dross on the planet, depending on who you ask. So we will take a dive into that. 280ZX, we're going to finish up that clutch line and possibly do some work on the fuel pump in the video today. And as a quick little kind of channel announcement, I was watching a video from the DM layer earlier. He was talking about one of those "Am I the Asshole" Reddit post stories about a game and whether or not a player should have been in it or not. A couple of the things that came up in it just gave me the idea for a new little series that I'm going to try and get done on here, something that I'll be able to put up very quickly. Hopefully it'll be a shorter form video than the ones I've normally done, but I'm going to call it "You're Doing It Wrong." And that's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but you're doing it wrong. In other words, it's one of those situations where somebody wants to do something that sounds cool, but they do it the wrong way. And it's going to be, that's a tongue-in-cheek way to present a quick advice video on how to do things like, for instance, run an evil character in a good campaign or a good character in an evil campaign, or how to run evil characters in the first place, and the reasons why they go wrong, the reasons why they don't work out, and generally the common mistakes that are made, and sometimes the common mistakes that come in advice or commentary that's given on it by others in the commenter sphere, so to speak. So, let's talk about the topic du jour here as we jump in. The RPG consent checklist, which I'm going to put up here, is, it comes in a bunch of different forms, but it is essentially just this meaningless little consent list that is more babysitting and hand-holding from the safety tools crowd. But more than anything else, it's a representation in the form that it comes out of one of the largest missteps that has happened in the overall culture of tabletop role-playing games here into 3.5, 4th edition, hit real hard in 5th edition. And this is the excessive focus on player agency, and where player agency has been misdefined so badly that it has turned into a great negative. As I've said before, players have agency to make the choices and decisions for their character within the reality that is set up by the game master. They do not have the agency to change anything else. They don't have the agency to change what races are available in a world. They don't have the agency to dictate how other players or NPCs behave within the game. They don't have the agency to do things in the world without consequences, etc., etc. This consent form, which, take a look at it, here's the game master's name, here's what the theme of the game is, what kind of rating it's going to have, and then these little check boxes for green, let's go ahead and do it, I'm okay with it, yellow, we need to kind of make that off stage or whatever, red, hardline, don't include these in the game. And you've got all your list of topics down here, like, bugs, blood, demons, eyeballs, gore, harm to animals, harm to children, rats, spiders, romance, sex, racism, real-world religion, sexism, specific cultural issues. And then, of course, all of these have blanks where you can write in your own stupid shit. And do you want the game master to follow up with you to clarify one of these responses? And if so, which one? I'm going to start off by going into some of the good, because everything's got the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good stuff is there is some use for this RPG consent checklist, but it's very, very limited. One is, and I wouldn't use this version, which is super common, because this leaves out a lot of stuff you need in this case, and that is Are you a professional game master? You're a professional GM. Somebody is paying you to run a game. You hand out this form to the people who are paying you to do a job. It doesn't say, oh, here's what the planned game theme is. Oh, here's what if this game were a movie, what its rating would be. It would be, what would you like the theme to be? And if this game were a movie, what would you want the rating to be? This should be more like not a consent checklist as much as almost like a menu that you order your professional game from. Somebody's paying you to play, and they say, we don't want any sex involved in this game, or we do want sex involved in this game, then you need to have it on there. And I would say don't include anything on there that you're not actually willing to have in your games. Like, for instance, I'm not going to narrate sex. Fade to black is where sex would stop, and really where relationships would largely stop in any of my games, because that's not what anybody's there for. And if I were a professional DM and somebody came in and said, oh, we want to have sex in this game and explicit sex in this game, I'm probably going to go back and say, well, I'm sorry, you need to hire somebody else because I'm not the person to run this. That's not the type of game I run. So on my checklist, it would just be sex, yes or no, and a note that says sex is always fade to black in my games. So it can be used as a tool, like as a menu order form for a party to bring to the table with professional game master. The other place it could possibly be used with some level of usefulness is at a con or in a public game, like for at a game store or something. If you're going to allow random members of the public to join the group, so to speak, and you're running the game at the con, they want to sign up for it. In that case, it should be altered to basically show what this game will include. Don't sign up for it if you are on this. So, for instance, I would change it. It wouldn't be a consent form anymore. It would be there are definitely bugs, definitely blood, definitely demons and gore. There's harm to children, and there's genocide or whatever else that's in this game. There are some things that could be called a parallel to specific cultural issues or whatever in my game. If you play, you are consenting to this. If you come to this game, you understand that these things will be in here, and you are not going to cry, whine, make a scene, make an ass of yourself, or try to go after the game store owner or the con host or whatever, the event organizer or whatever, or me, because you decided to sit down at the table and you, for whatever reason, have a problem with heat stroke and I'm running a desert game. The last place I could see the consent checklist being useful is, once again, not as a consent checklist, but as an application. Application for group. I'm going on one of the various different Facebook groups or pages or something saying, hey, I've got 2 slots available in the 3.5 game that I'm running. Are you interested in playing? Oh, yeah, I'm interested in playing. Okay, cool. I'm going to send this over to you. This is the player application form. And it literally just becomes a filter for me to keep people out of my game. When I say keep people out of my game, once again, I would change the way some of this stuff looks. What are you looking for? Are these things that you like to include in your role-playing? I'd probably add some stuff about, are you more role-playing heavy? Are you more whatever? What races are you interested in playing? I'd probably add some to it. But as a general rule, I might hand this over and be like, instead of it being, are you giving consent? It would be, are you okay with these things? And I'm not using it as I'm going to bend and manipulate and capitulate myself to your whim. I'm going to do these things that are on your form. I'm literally using it just like I would use a job application. And when I look down and I see that you don't want blood or demons in your game, it's kind of like when I look down and see that somebody on a job application works for 6 months and then is off for 6 months and then works for 6 months and then is off for 6 months, because they basically stick around long enough to get unemployment and then stay unemployed until the unemployment wears out. Not hiring that person. If you come in here and you're like, oh yeah, I want a bunch of crazy sex, but I don't want anything that could be quote unquote homophobia or racism or sexism or real world religion or anything like that, and in my game, I'm just going to say, well, then you don't need to be in this table. Not necessarily because I'm going to include certain things in my game, but because it tilts things towards a certain kind of person. I'll use this as an example. Let's say you've got serious issues with homophobia and racism in your game. Well, generally homophobia is not going to be anything that comes up in my games because I don't, sex and sexual relationships are pretty much meaningless in them. But if I'm running like a true to form medieval style world and you're openly gay and you decide to make that your character's identity, you're going to have problems because it's not part of the social norm. Racism is something that happens on a regular basis. If I'm going to have that kind of thing in my game where like elves and dwarves don't get along and have certain views towards each other, you're probably not going to need to be in my game if you're that sensitive to it. But it's also, if I know for a fact that, say, for instance, somebody's really irritated by real world religion, what's going to happen when somebody brings up real world religion at the table in normal conversation outside of character? Are we going to have a hissy fit flip out? What if I do something that, let's use the racism or the homophobia, for example. What if something that has nothing to do with somebody's race or sexual preference comes up in the game, but it just so happens to be something that triggers that person as homophobia or racism? Well, I can use this. If you're overly sensitive to these kind of things, then I'm probably not going to have you in my game, because I do a lot of social and political and socioeconomic and geopolitical issues within my game world, and some of them are going to reflect real world. So there's your 3 good things you can use. You can use it as a filter to keep people out of your group if you're bringing in from the public. You can use it as kind of a, here's what's in this game for cons and public games. And if you're a professional GM, you can use it as kind of a menu. So that's about it for anything good that can come from the good old RPG consent checklist. Everything else about this thing is just bad. This is the inmates running the asylum style player agency over the rest of the world nonsense. First off, let's go down the list. Bugs. You saying I'm not allowed to have any kind of bug or insect or anything as part of my game? First off, if you're the kind of person who can't handle descriptions of something you might be a little frightened by, you probably don't need to be at the game table anyway. You probably need to be in therapy. For instance, if you're so radically arachnophobic that you can't handle the description of a spider for the length of time that it happens in a game, no. That's the kind of thing where you come in and you pull the game master aside and you say, hey dude, I get it, it's just a game and everything, and normally I don't have a problem with, say spiders, but your Attack of the Giant Mega Spider Queen campaign, where we're constantly in spider webs and going into the giant funnel webs layer and all this kind of other stuff, it's just a little bit taxing on me. Is there some way we can tone this down? Or do I need to step out for a few sessions for you to make adjustments? Or do I just need to find another table? What can we do here? I don't want to rain on the party's parade, and I love playing the game, and you do a great job, but this is just a little much for me. That's perfectly okay. But the whole, I gave you a consent form nonsense, and I'm just going to not have stuff in this game, doesn't need to be there. But blood? This is a combat-based game. There's gonna be blood. You just want me to just not describe any blood? Demons are part of Dungeons and Dragons in general. The mystical, the magical, these are things that are here, especially in these fantasy role-playing games. Eyeballs, I just don't quite get. I mean, I could understand maybe gore being on there because it's like, do you really want to hear super graphic stuff? Harm to animals, I hate to tell you this, but we're an adventuring party in the medieval age. I'm probably going to need to kill a deer or something. Need to go hunting. Animals make up, even fantastical animals make up enemies in a lot of these games, especially at lower levels. Harm to children, I can kind of understand being in there. Maybe I just don't even want that in my fantasy world. Rats and spiders, once again, being common things, I wouldn't even have them on a list, and I don't see any reason for them to be here. Again, very common enemies, especially in a fantasy setting, and that's the kind of thing where if any mention is too much, you just need therapy, and tabletop role-playing games are probably not where you need to be, except in a therapy setting. And if you can handle it and somebody's just being excessive, that's just like anything else. Pull the DM aside. Relationships, once again, for me, these should be an extraordinarily minor part of any tabletop role-playing game. I know there are some people who do it, but the thing about romance and sex is romance and sex are inherently and naturally something that is very exclusive. It is, I want to have sex with my wife, or I am in a romance with this girl over here. It is not, the whole party is having sex with my wife, or the whole party is in a romance with this guy or girl over there. And you don't want to have, at least as much as you can, you want to have a very minimal impact of those exclusive relationships, even if it's just a really close friendship and there's nothing sexual or romantic about it. You don't want to have those super exclusive relationships and connections at your table just because you have to dedicate time to them to build them and make them worthwhile. And if you do that, you are dedicating time that is not just spotlight on one individual player at the table or two individual players at the table. It is exclusive to those two. And then once you start getting into the explicit stuff, it's like, generally none of us are there for that. I mean, if that's your table, more power to you. If that's what you like to do, is have weird, if this is your weird fetish time, then find a group that does weird fetish time stuff. But as far as it being on the consent checklist, I guess I could see a place for that. It's like, hey dude, I'm not here for your sexual fantasies. Check, no, check, yes. Social and cultural issues, this one I have a problem with. These games, either A, you're doing a dungeon crawl. You're doing OSR style, keep on the borderlands, cave of chaos, dive into the dungeon, get the treasure, come back out type stuff. And this kind of stuff doesn't play into those games anyway, for the most part, because at the end of the day, they're basically adventure video games played on tabletop with pens and dice, where I'm the paladin, I kill evil things, I go into the dungeon, I fight the monsters, I get the treasure, I come back out. And if you're running more of a storytelling type game, if you really want to have that immersive world, if you're like me and your Hickman Revolution style and you want a narrative game, or if you're one of these people who's gone way off the rails into story gaming, you can't have really good, meaningful stories without these kind of parallels into them, because cultural issues are a thing. Yeah, I can see real world religion not being in there, depending on what the setting is. If I'm in a real world setting, like if I'm playing Call of Cthulhu and I'm in 1920s or 1910s America, yes, there's going to be religion there. I mean, real world religion is going to be there because I'm in the real world. Even if I'm playing, say, Cyberpunk, real world religion at least is going to have some cameo style appearances in it. Whether or not you want it to be a focus of the game, it's just, once again, what's the theme of this game? Does it have a heavy religious theme to it? Then don't join. But for the most part, social and cultural issues are important. And these things I don't really think should be on there at all. You might include like racism, sexism, homophobia, which I really hate that term. Nobody is afraid of gay people. You might have a certain situation where it's like, hey, I don't want like blatant racism in my game. We're not talking off stage, fade to black type stuff. It's one thing, it's like, hey, are real world racial slurs acceptable? Might be something you could put in there. So that if my bad guy comes in and starts dropping, all kinds of disparaging terms towards a particular race that character happens to be, because he's a bad, evil dude, and maybe he's a clan leader or something in a Call of Cthulhu game, do we want to say, hey, he says a bunch of racial slurs, or do we want to actually use those words? Yeah, there's some gray area there, but really not so much in the way it's presented in the good old checklist. As far as mental and physical health, and this ought to bring us close to an end on this stupid thing. Cancer, for the most part, unless it's like some kind of crux of what's going on in the game. This guy has cancer, that's why he's hiring the party as investigators. Something of that nature, I could maybe see something like that. Again, if you can't hear about cancer because mama died from cancer or something, you really probably shouldn't be playing. Either A, it's so fresh and so new to you that you just can't handle it right now because it just happened, and the role-playing game table may not be where you need to be, and that's a conversation for you to have with your DM anyway. But if this is just something that's so triggering to you, you've probably got bigger issues because it's pretty much everywhere. Claustrophobia, once again, if you can't separate your character from yourself, from your imagination, you've got problems that go beyond a consent checklist. Gaslighting, I think, is kind of strange in here because that would be more like a tactic that the game master uses, but that would still be a bad tactic. It's really kind of hard to do gaslighting necessarily in game because the players know better, whereas their character may not as much. And if the game master's gaslighting the players, that's just being a bad game master because that's essentially cheating. I don't even know why that's on there. Genocide definitely should not be something that's on this checklist because, once again, combat-style games where that kind of thing happens and epic heroes need epic villains and epic villains do really bad things. Heat stroke, natural disasters, paralysis and restraint, police, the town guard or whatever. Those kind of things all kind of fall into the same thing as like your claustrophobia, your cancer, your freezing to death. If you can't separate yourself from your character, you got issues. If you're that heavily triggered, and that may just be a warning sign for that person to not be allowed at the table in the first place. Pregnancy, miscarriage, or abortion, I really don't see why this is here either, because this probably shouldn't come up in your game. There are some extreme horror, like Call of Cthulhu style situations where maybe it can come up, maybe it can be a part, and maybe it's something that's there, but you're going back into things that are kind of, especially when you start talking about miscarriage and abortion, it's virtually impossible to do these things tastefully. It's generally something that is going to be vile and disgusting and wrong. And that's going to trigger some people in themselves because there's, believe it or not, people in this world who don't see abortion as the vile, disgusting thing that it is. And, miscarriage is an extraordinarily traumatic thing that really, once again, kind of like sex, is so exclusive and personally focused that it really shouldn't be in the game, because that once again moves from I'm putting the spotlight on a character to I am darkening the room to where all you can see is that character, and I'm literally cutting everybody else out by doing something so intensely personal. Self-harm, same deal. In what context? Do we just not want somebody who committed suicide in the game? Like, oh, you found so-and-so and they hanged themselves? Again, if you can't handle it, that kind of goes back into the claustrophobia cancer thing. If you can't handle it in real life and in fantasy, then you probably have bigger issues that you need to deal with. Sexual assault, that one right there, I think is one of the few things that kind of does belong there. I would be extremely irritated if I were in a game and just out of nowhere a rape description comes up, like a graphic one, especially if it has nothing to do with what's going on and it's not something I was warned about ahead of time. I can see that, so that one might be one that kind of gets a pass. Starvation, terrorism, seriously. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter is one thing. You got to look at it from that perspective in one way. Also, once again, epic heroes need epic villains. Terrorism is just violence for political reasons. That kind of just falls into the category of you're playing a game that has a combat focus. Unless you want every single adventure to be kind of a dungeon crawl, go kill the goblins type deal, it's a type of bad guy. Torture, same deal. Once again, that just kind of is in the vein of we all know what common decency is, and when the game master is going far too far with descriptions just to get shock value. But overall, once again, epic villains are required for epic heroes. Thirst may be the dumbest one on this list, just because, seriously, is there even a person on the planet who has super strong feelings towards thirst? Somebody has to, because somebody decided to put it on this list. But anyway, so that's the RPG consent checklist. This thing to me is not only stupid, it is also a hallmark of one of the things that is overall ruining tabletop role-playing games in a lot of ways, because it's so intrusive into everybody else's behavior, and it is so intrusive into the game master's world building and making a realistic lived-in world, all for the whim and caprices of a single player. And even worse, if you have multiple players who have conflicting caprices. This thing came up again. I figured I'd weigh in and give my 2 cents on it. It does have some utility somewhere on a very small, limited scale. But in general, if a player comes up and hands you one of these things, you should just throw it straight in the shredder and say, hey, I don't think this is the table for you. Personally, to me, it is a massive red flag if a player is asking about consent forms in the first place. It's also a massive red flag if the game master is handing me one and I'm not at a con or a game store or, hiring a game master or something of that nature where it makes a little bit more sense. Anyway, tell me what you think in the comment section below. Give me some ideas for things on the You're Doing It Wrong segment. Maybe there'll be something I shoot soon. Till then, I'll see you guys next time.